Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm sitting here at home, and even though we are not having class at church today, we are going to be having worship service for the first time this weekend. We had it last night. It was wonderful to see everybody, and now this morning at 10:15 here in Grants, we're going to be having church again. Um, and so this is it's really exciting. It's been a tough 3 months of trying to figure out how to do church in a totally different way. So I'm excited to see everybody, and I know not everybody's going to be able to make it, and so I'm going to try to have the sermon on YouTube and also on podcast. Um, but anyways, this morning we're continuing our study of the Psalms, and we haven't had class for a couple weeks now, as I was on vacation last week, and we've been looking at the book of Psalms, like I said, and we've been looking at the Psalms in light of basically three different categories. We've been looking at the idea of orientation, which is when everything seems to be going well. And these are, psalms of praise. These are psalms that just kind of happen naturally because you're just praising God because life is good. But then you have disorientation, and that's what we're talking about for the last 6 weeks of this class, is this idea of disorientation, and how do we talk to God when life is disoriented, and things aren't right, and there's brokenness that is readily apparent in our world. And so we had talked about that for the last 6 weeks, and now we're going to begin to kind of look at new orientation, because it just kind of follows disorientation. But before we get into the psalm, we're going to be looking at Psalm 30. Um, you know, just want to talk a little bit more about disorientation, because uh, we are disoriented in a way that, as a country, that we just haven't been disoriented in quite some time. COVID-19 hit the scene, and everything just fell apart. It just fell apart. Our economy, um, and a lot of other things. People's lives changed dramatically. Schools got shut down. Parents were having to do homeschooling when that wasn't their choice. And it all felt very disorienting, and we didn't know how to handle it all. And honestly, I didn't think anything was going to kick COVID-19 off the front stage for a while. But then all the stuff surrounding George Floyd happened, and COVID-19 was put on the back burner, and all these protests and riots and various other demonstrations hit the scene, and life just got very disorienting in a whole different way in the midst of all the COVID-19. And so I just want to touch briefly on this topic that is on the forefront of all of our minds, before we get into new orientation. Um, I have a lot of things that I think, and a lot of things that I could say about race, and about um, just what our response should be to all of these things. But I'm going to try to limit myself to just one thing, and that is that God made all human beings in His image, and there are still many people, including Christians, who don't live like that is true. They don't live like God created all humans in His image. Therefore, there's going to be tension in our world when people who look different, act different, and have different cultures interact. That's just going to happen. And I believe that human beings are image bearers of God, and this is one of the greatest fundamental truths of the Judeo-Christian faith, that is that we all bear the image of God, and nobody bears the image of God more than somebody else. And when that truth is rejected, then Christians must rise up and we must follow the path of Jesus, of love and self-sacrifice, and do our best to call people to the truth that all people are made in God's image. And so many of us in this difficult time that we're in right now, we continue to be stuck in disorientation. And so the language that we've talked about for the last several weeks in this Psalms class will continue to be used, and I would encourage you to continue to use them. And if you have missed any of these classes, just look them up on my Facebook page, and you can go back and just learn this language of lament and this language of disorientation. But I think it's also important to learn the language of new orientation. And that's really what I want to talk about a little bit today, because there will come a time when we are through the difficulties that we are in right now. I mean, it may not happen in our lifetime, but my hope is that we can teach this language of new orientation so that the people, the generations that follow us, can speak this language to God, and can have something to say to God when he comes through. Because even if he doesn't come through when it comes to race relations, even if he doesn't come through with ending the epidemic of COVID-19 right away, my hope is that we will have the language to speak to God when this does happen, because it will. He will set things right, and he is at work in the world today. And so we're going to look at Psalm 30, because this is a really good example of a psalm of new orientation. It just does a really good job of kind of showing how one moves from disorientation to new orientation. So first of all, in Psalm 30, the psalmist begins with kind of a summary of what God has done. So let's start reading Psalm 30, starting in verse 1. I will exalt you, Lord, for you rescued me. You refused to let my enemies triumph over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you restored my health. You brought me up from the grave, O Lord. You kept me from falling into the pit of death. So notice that he really talks about this disorientation that he went through. He had enemies. He needed help. He was in the grave. There was a pit of death that was looming, but God rescued him. He restored him. He brought him up. He kept him from falling into the pit of death. And so this is why the psalmist is addressing God, is because there's something really amazing that's happening here. Then the psalmist continues with an invitation to the community of faith. Let's read verses 4 and 5. Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. So for this psalmist, God's anger only lasts a moment, and his weeping only lasts through the night, but joy comes in the morning. In other words, this moment of disorientation for the psalmist, this moment of desperation and difficulty, even though it may have felt endless while it was happening, now that he's looking back at it, he realizes this is just a blip on the radar of the life of faith. And maybe you can think of a moment in your life like that, when it seemed like the difficulty that you were facing, it seemed like it was never ending. It seemed like you might die, but now that you look back at it, you realize this is just a blip on the radar of faith, and now I can praise God. And so he invites all the godly ones, verse 4, to praise God's holy name. Then in the next verse, the psalmist speaks of the journey from orientation to disorientation. And I think this is really telling, because I think this kind of shows the journey that many of us go on. So let's keep reading in verse 6. When I was prosperous, I said, nothing can stop me now. Your favor, O Lord, made me as secure as a mountain, and then you turned away from me, and I was shattered. Can you think of a moment in your life when you were thinking, nothing can stop me now? This is so amazing. This is so wonderful. The way life is going, I feel as secure as a mountain. And then God turns away and you are shattered. Um, I can think of moments in life when I was shattered, when everything felt secure, everything felt like it was going well, and then the rug just gets pulled out from under you and everything falls apart. Let's keep reading. Verse 8. I cried out to you, O Lord. I begged the Lord for mercy, saying, what will you gain if I die, if I sink into the grave? Can my dust praise you? Can it tell of your faithfulness? Hear me, Lord, and have mercy on me. Help me, O Lord. And so this psalmist is speaking of this moment when he was completely shattered, and he's crying out to God, and he's motivating God. He's saying, God, what can my dust do for you? My dust can't praise you. My dust can't do works of righteousness for you. If I die, I'm no use to you. So he cries out to God and he asks for help. And this is what happens when God answers. Verse 11. You have turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You have taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy, that I might sing praises to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks forever. I will give you thanks forever. And so, as we read this psalm and as we talk about this idea of new orientation, my hope is that we will keep this language close in the midst of the disorientation that we are feeling, because guess what? God can break into this disorientation and he can change it in a moment. He can change it in a moment. He can turn things around in a moment. And one of the most important things that these Psalms show us is that we need to be ones who tell our story. We need to be ones who tell our story. And as we own and honor the story that we are living in, when God comes through, we can begin to tell a new story. But so often, so many of us are so afraid to tell the story of true life, of the difficulty of being in the pit, of being disoriented. We're afraid to tell that story. And so therefore, we don't tell the new story when things turn around. Excuse me. And so I just want to encourage all of us who are followers of Jesus, is don't ignore your story. Sometimes you have to live in the pain. Sometimes you have to cry out to God from the pit. But keep telling the story. It's part of healing. And once we tell that story of bitterness, of harshness, that story of being shattered, of God turning his face, then when God delivers, we can tell a new story. And so as we, as a church, continue through this time of disorientation, this time of difficulty, this time of pain, this time of just realizing that things are not right in this world, I would ask us just to continue to live in the story, but trust God through the story. Know that he has the power to lift you up. And when he does, may we all tell a new story, and may we all invite the godly ones to join in praise with us. Everybody be blessed, and I hope you have a wonderful first day of the week, a wonderful Sunday.